Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Jim, I am so impressed right now because I learned this morning that something amazing happened in 2011. And I thought the thing that happened in 2011 that was amazing is that Rebecca and I got married. But I guess that's just small potatoes compared to this. And it came out of that Republican thing with the people who were opposing the speaker's election in the House and got those rules passed. So I want to talk today about 3 bills that have been introduced in the Senate by Rand Paul, right, for the last, 11 years now, and are going to happen again. The Read the Bills Act, One Subject at a Time Act, and Write the Laws Act. And people, if you dig into this stuff, you even read just a little bit about these, your minds are going to blow because Congress is taking our money and themselves for a ride that they don't need to be taking. So let's talk about this. And by the way, they can come and enforce these crazy rules that they make on us too. But let's start at the beginning, man. I am as you know, I'm on about this stuff. Can we start with the whole review again of what's a law and what's a rule and how that works in Congress?
Just for level setting. And let me just add to your introduction, if I may add, I'm sure that the wedding was more significant. However,
it was. Her hair, her hat caught on fire. You can see it on YouTube. It was great.
Yes, it's something. So as we're sitting here, each of these bills have now been reintroduced once again by Rand Paul in the U.S. Senate. So people are watching right now. We will have it's happening as we're recording this, but we will have the bill numbers in the description, the show description, so you can actually see it. They'll also be available at downsizedc.org, where I co-authored these bills with Perry Willis. Okay.
Yes.
Now your question.
Yes. What the heck? So let's talk about rules and laws just for a second. Refresh.
Yes. Congress is the most anarchic institution in the land. What I mean by that is that they don't follow their own rules. A rule is something that exists to be waived. The entire purpose of the rule is to say, well, we intend to follow this procedure under normal conditions, but they do their most pernicious acts on their way out the door for a leave or the end of the session. They leave and go home to their districts. And before they do that, they rush to push a kludge of stuff through, and they suspend the rules when they do this. They also suspend the rules.
Appropriations bill. Sorry, but we just pushed through this. I don't know how tall it is.
Yes. And if you recall on the episode where we discussed we explained that they haven't passed under the normal appropriations process since the mid-90s. They have not followed the rules for the appropriations process since the mid-90s.
Yeah.
So it's the spending that's the real problem, as we're going to get across here before we close today.
Okay, so they can make rules.
The law,
suspend them.
They can make rules. They don't have to follow their own rules. A law is completely different because a law has teeth. It has enforcement. There's zero consequence for violating the rules, and rules can be easily waived. But a law cannot be waived, and it has teeth. It has consequences. So for all 3 bills that we're going to discuss today, they each have an enforcement clause in them.
So this would mean that if Congress made these rules into laws, that Congress would be held responsible if they broke the law for not doing business the way they are constitutionally obligated to do business.
This is a tricky thing to do. So consequences to them would merely be that they would waste their time. And I'm going to get into this as we discuss with the Read the Bills and One Subject and so forth. We have the same enforcement clause for all 3 of these things, but the consequence is a protection for you that is guaranteed, that protects you from them and makes all of their work for naught.
Isn't this crazy? A couple of libertarians talking about making more laws. So read the bills. Read the Bills Act does what?
So, the idea is that ignorance of the law should never be an excuse. especially for politicians. You know, if we've talked about this before, if you have power of attorney, you represent someone. And we have a great many people in Congress who are accountants, who are attorneys, who are business owners. So they all know what the idea of delegating power of attorney involves, having somebody be your representative or agent. If you have that responsibility and you sign a document on behalf of your client or the person you're representing, could even be a family member. Some people have power of attorney for their family members, right? You have to use careful diligence in doing that. And Congress does not read hardly any of the bills that they pass.
Whoa, hold on. Seriously? I mean,
completely serious. There's no way they could. There's way too many pages of legislation that are passed and far more even than that are introduced. There is no way. In fact, there are bills, there are entire bills where literally no human being, none of the 435 of them, nor their staff has read the entire bill.
So what do they do? Get like a click button where it says accept the terms and conditions and you never read them. But sometimes there's a check mark that says that you did read them and then you click OK.
Well, if you click that button, one of the things that you actually are doing is you're saying, I have faith that this is a standard boilerplate agreement that's pretty common to everybody else on the web. And I probably don't have too much to worry about in signing it. I still wouldn't advise doing that in general. I'll tell you, I'm a pain in the rear end because I read my rental agreement when I go to get a car. Okay. So we're going to be there for a couple of minutes because I'm going to read the thing. It doesn't take long to do because they are boilerplate, but it still takes some time. And Congress doesn't exercise this due diligence before they do two things that are very important. One, they impose a regulation or an order upon you that is binding to you in your life and comes with consequences. And two, they spend money, lots of it. Anywhere from tens of billions to hundreds of billions of dollars at a chop.
Without reading about why.
Without reading about it.
So somebody is actually telling people, okay, you need to do this thing, Bill, Congressman Bill, because it has these benefits. And I go, okay, I'm voting for the bill.
That's exactly right. So here's what we're going to do about that.
Yeah.
Here's what we're going to do about that. First, we're going to say that before you cast an affirmative, if you're going to cast an affirmative vote, you're going to vote yes to spend more money, retain a program, whatever. You're going to sign an affidavit saying that you have either read the bill or you've heard the entire bill read. Now we're going to make it.
There's a provision here to actually read the bill on the floor, right?
Yes, yes. And this is my favorite part of the bill because the requirement, these bills are very long and the mind will procure what the hiney will endure. So if this was the law and a quorum, which the Constitution defines as 50% plus one of the members, and we're open to some discussion about what that should be, but we have it presently listed as a quorum, has to sit and listen to a literal word for word in order of the reading of the bill from start to finish before the vote, because the mind will procure what the hiney will endure. And I guarantee you the bill will be a lot shorter. All the bills will get shorter. They will cover less ground. They will be much more concise and direct if that is the requirement.
It's going to eliminate pork barreling and some other things too. And what do they call it when they stuff other things that would never pass?
Yes, which we're going to get to. We're going to get to that next. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I know.
We've got to build a data set too, but it will be shorter, simpler, and cleaner. And then the bill says that starts a clock. So for the next 7 days, the bill will be posted online. I've kind of got ahead of where we were planning on going. I think we were going to talk about sunshine.
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to ask you because this sounds to me like the term they throw around is sunshine. So it's like throwing some light on the subject, right?
Yep. So we're doing a waiting period. That's how we're addressing this. We're giving them a waiting period. So the reading's done. The out loud reading's done. Before the final vote can be taken, the bill should be posted online for 7 days. Where do we get the 7 days figure? So there was this concept 15, 20 years ago that if you're going to buy a gun, you should have a cooling off period before you were able to acquire the gun. And we thought Congress should have a cooling off period before it passed legislation. But more importantly, we felt the bill should be posted online for the public to see, to be able to read. So you should be able to read it, Bill. I should be able to read it. Everyone listening to us right now should be able to read it. Every American should be able to read it. Their favorite watchdog group should be able to read it. So should their favorite talk show hosts and programming they're watching. Like everyone should have a shot at this bill for 7 days to know what's in it, because now we know it's coming up for a vote. And this is the time when I wish people would kill some of these bills while they were still in the cradle. But this is the time when most people are going to be paying the most attention, because the bill is about to come up for a vote. And so we want to make sure that that they have a chance to address the bill. The public has a chance to address the bill with their congressman during this crucial period right before the vote's going to be taken.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Please.
So we heard during the whole Speaker McCarthy issue that this was obstructing business as usual, that this would end, the way that Congress is able to do it. It would drastically impact the efficiency, and that a few people could, by just saying no, stop everything. How do we respond to that?
This is representation in action. Almost the entire document we call the Constitution is designed to do exactly what you just said. And if we get down to brass tacks, the concept that you're talking about is something called gridlock. Now, I'm of the belief, and I think most Americans actually are, that most of what Congress does pass is not good. It's undesirable, and some of it is downright bad. So if you say we're going to slow everything down, what you are saying is we're going to slow down shady deals. We're going to slow down big spending. We're going to reduce the number of programs that the government has. If those are some of the consequences that come out, I think on balance, this tends to be good. There are no perfect solutions, recall. There are only trade-offs, and the trade-offs come out heavily in favor of this, and they have the cumulative effect. Well, I mean, the organization that's pitching this, the one that I run that does this, is called Downsize DC, for Pete's sake. So we definitely wanted to try to create an environment where there would be less incentive or improved incentives to actually be diligent and pass things that the American people would actually want, as opposed to just any willy-nilly thing they could possibly shove into a bill. So and this is the same, Bill, this is the same kind of prudence you have to exercise at your family table when you're trying to figure out where you're going to spend your money and how you're going to spend your time. You have to do the exact same thing. They spend our money irresponsibly and without consequence to them. So we need some protection, some measure that forces them to have some restraint.
Can you look into the crystal ball a little bit and say what would happen if they did this and somehow managed to ramrod a Read the Bills Act through that was really bad and that didn't have teeth?
Oh, I mean, they have a Read the Bills rule right now that they can easily waive. So I'm not really super concerned about that. And by the way, I see that as an improvement. When we talked about the Speaker McCarthy episode, we talked about why this was on balance a good thing, but it's not going to get us where we need to go. What we actually need here is a law that has some teeth to it, which we're coming up to the teeth here. We'll get to that in a second.
Anything more you want to say about sunshine before we move on to the teeth?
Well, I want to say one more thing about the actual construction of the bill itself, because the other thing that Representative Amash impressed upon us the need for this, and it's not in the present version of the bill that's introduced in the Senate, but when the Read the Bills Act has been introduced in the House in the past, there was a whole section in there that had to do with how amendments are written. So legislation is not written in a way that you can read it. Like, let's say you've got a novel that you're going to read, and the novel draws you in, and it's written in a language called English, and you're able to follow it that way. Legislation has the appearance of being English, but it ain't. You have usually, to understand what's happening, you need three things. You need the text of the bill in front of you itself. You need the code that it modifies. And then you need some level of the art or the expertise of understanding how that code is understood in the regulatory world in which it exists, because there are terms of art in there. And there's very few congressmen that have this on any given day, on any given subject. And so you commonly find language that says something like, let me give you, because I have to read this in order to make sure I get this right. Section 415, 21 USC 305D is amended in subsection A2 by inserting after the first sentence the following. So it's very, very hard to track. Yeah. So we said that, listen, you should show what it said, and then you should show what it'll say. Like, you can have that in there, but you should show what it said. You should show what it'll say. And that way, it's easy for the congressperson to sit there and at least take care of 2 of those 3 things. That doesn't solve the term of art problem, but it does address the readability of a bill. So
Yeah,
we had that provision in the House version before. It's not in the Senate version that Rand Paul has repeatedly introduced over the years.
we get that in our voter pamphlet here in California, where if we're going to amend the state constitution, it'll give us the old way, it'll give us the proposed way, and we can clearly understand what the differences are without having to become like, legislative artists.
You don't realize you just did it, but you just segued into our next topic, because 45 out of 50 states, 45 out of 50 states have a 1 subject provision in their constitution. And that provision has been applied in almost, I'm not aware of any exceptions. There are 23, 25 states approximately that have referenda. In other words, the ability of citizens to put an issue on the ballot.
Right.
And I believe every single one of those states has a 1 subject provision for that. So citizens wanting to put something on their ballot in the half of the states where that's legal have to follow a 1 subject rule. It makes good sense, by the way, that they do that. And it is in the constitution of 45 of the 50 states to do this. But guess what?
It's not in the congressional rules. I don't know.
It hasn't been there most of the time. It was there at the beginning when the initial manual for how to do procedure, you've heard like Robert's Rules of Order. The initial manual for procedure was called the Jefferson Manual, because Thomas Jefferson was the second vice president of the United States. And while he was in the Senate, being the kind of guy he was, he observed what was going on and he started making notes, and he created a rule guide that became the perpetual rule guide for decades to come. And it did also have a 1 subject provision, and it had a reading provision, which required the full read aloud version of every bill, not once, but twice, before a vote could be taken.
And these are good ideas, regardless of Jefferson's position on things like slavery.
Yeah. A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah.
Even if he's a broken clock, it's a good idea.
It's a good idea. So 1 subject at a time. Just to be completely transparent about this simply means that if you're going to have a bill to do something, it does 1 and only 1 thing. It doesn't have a whole bunch.
It states it right in the title of the bill. There's just a title right at the top. Clear, descriptive, 1 topic. That's it. Okay.
Are there any exceptions?
No.
Like spending bills, appropriations?
No. So the way the appropriations bills work is that the committee that is over charge of it can only allocate funds that relate to their committee. So we tried to be fair to Congress here. They've divided themselves into a set of what are called permanent committees. They've been longstanding. They've existed for a long time. So, and they can set up as many committees as they want. But what we're suggesting is that if they want to combine things, those combinations have to make sense in the sense that a committee was able to review it. There was a committee of jurisdiction that was able to review that matter. So the subject matter for an appropriations bill can be as broad as the work of a single committee, but no broader. So if you're bringing 2 committees in, you got a different bill.
Different bill. So we would have a bill, a 1 subject at a time bill for housing and urban development. We'd have a 1 subject at a time bill for defense. We have a 1 subject at a time for, the various different pockets of where money is spent would require their own appropriations bill brought by a committee.
Right. And they have already outlined what the appropriations bills are. They have they have an appropriation schedule. They're simply not following that. Yeah. And we're saying you have to follow that. And each one of these things have to be passed individually. They cannot be passed in a cluster, what they are presently calling an omnibus bill, but it's a cluster. You know what?
Not an omnibus.
That's what it is. An omnibus will run you right over. It runs the taxpayer right over.
Every time.
Yep. So, we were inspired originally because there was a port security bill that was passed.
This is back in the day, like 2010, 2011?
26, actually.
Wow.
Port security bills passed. The Senate Majority Leader wanted to prohibit online gambling. So we woke up the morning after the vote was taken to discover that he had inserted overnight, right before the vote was taken, a online gambling ban. Now, pray tell, what did port security and online gambling have to do with one another? And I'm going to go one step further.
Don't obstruct progress. We're moving forward here.
I'm going to
What's
go
wrong
one
with you,
step
Babka?
further. I'm going to go one step further. Read the bills, by the way, would have helped prevent this too, because it was a last minute insertion. But I'm going to go one step further and say, I grew up watching Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday morning cartoons. And there was one of the most famous ones was about Bill, who lived on Capitol Hill. And he would explain the procedure by which he became a law. And he would celebrate, of course, the fact that he did succeed in it. And he made it sound hard. And I'm here to tell you that if you believe that view of civics, you believe in a myth. It's what it's supposed to be, but it ain't what it is. And what I mean by that is that you take a unpopular idea that could not stand scrutiny on its own. It will not stand on its own 2 feet like Bill was saying he needed to. And you sneak it into a bill that is sure to pass. Like, I'll pick one for you. Any defense bill, okay? Are you going to vote against the troops bill? Do you hate the troops bill? Do you really hate our American military? I mean, how unpatriotic are you? A communist? Are you a terrorist? What are you? Right?
Right.
And they could shove everything in that bill. Now, we have made an argument to the members of the Senate, the House and Senate, to say that basically this is the leadership taking advantage of the backbenchers. So think strategically here. Leadership is small. Backbenchers is the majority, overwhelming majority. More than 2/3, more than 3/4 of the people in the House do not have any real power to speak of. Okay. It's a small handful of people. We identify them at being roughly a couple dozen that run the entire show, and the leadership of each respective party, the 2 or 3 people at the top of each respective party, really, really run the show. Okay. They're hyper powerful, and all these backbenchers are not. So when they come down with something like the happy, awesome Freedom for Children of Patriots Without Healthcare Act of 2023.
Wait, hold on a sec. Is this real?
No,
I saw that. I'm
but,
like, okay.
But they use these kind of like terms, right? You know, Patriot Act was actually an acronym. Patriot was an acronym. You know,
yes.
You're going to vote against patriotism? Well, we're going to be spying on people. We're going to be completely crushing their Fourth Amendment rights. We're going to treat every American like a criminal, and we're going to view their photos that they send each other, including their you-know-what pics. You know, we're gonna really delve deeply into who they are. We're gonna have all that stored in a warehouse. Okay, all of it stored forever in a warehouse in Utah, where we can access it whenever we wish. Okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna presume every American guilty of being a terrorist,
right?
And use this information. But we'll put it under a happy name,
right?
We'll give it a great name. How wonderful this is, right? Okay. So yes, when you're talking about they have a bill that nobody can vote against, and it's got some name like the happy, awesome Freedom for Children of Patriots Without Healthcare Act of 2023.
Yes.
And you can't vote against it. But then you go back home and you run for re-election, and they say, Bill voted to take children and steal their lunches. Did you know that Bill voted for, and they'll go on, and they'll scroll on the screen. He voted for tax increases. He voted to end the military. He voted just to keep going, right? And all of that stuff that's showing up on the screen at that hour was stuffed in one of those bills like that. They never, ever would have voted for it. It looks like they were hypocrites that did not do what they promised their constituents back in their district. This is what the leadership's doing to them, is making them vulnerable to charges of not being supported something. And this stuff was stuffed. 99 times out of 100, the things they're being accused of were stuffed in some bigger bill, and they were an unrelated topic. And
so
we're
if
saying,
the legislature if they'd had time to read the bill, they would never have voted for it. Even if their leadership was forcing them, twisting their arm to do it. If it was one subject at a time, it never would have gotten into the bill in the first place.
Right. That's exactly right. And have you ever met, they're usually Republicans that say this, they go, well, you know what we really need right now is a line item veto.
Oh, right. Yes. Hogwash.
Line item vetoes are unconstitutional, and they also ruin what is probably the best part of the main Constitution. I love the Bill of Rights, but if you take that out and you look at the original articles that were passed, there was a balance called the separation of powers.
Yes.
And it destroys it and makes the president more powerful. And all you need to do to put this idea completely to bed is to tell the Republican who says, well, you know what Congress needs is a line item veto. Okay, well, let's give that to Joe Biden. Well, wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see your point.
Yeah, this gives the president way too much power. Congress should have done their job the right way in the first place. This is the legislature exercising upon itself a line item veto. They are limiting all their stuff to one topic, and they are making it, frankly, easier for the president to veto the bill, because this cuts all this backroom dealing that goes on behind the scenes out. It really does. Okay, where stuff is shoved in, and so we've seen this happen again and again and again, and it's nearly every session. I shouldn't say it's nearly. It's every session. It's not nearly. 100% every session. So that's the one subject of the Time Act. It says clear descriptive title, limited to one topic. Everything in the bill has to conform with it.
Can we talk about Write the Laws Act? Because this is something that is like really personal right now for me.
Why is it personal?
I have a toll-free number or two. Remember those? Used to be able to call them, and the party that answered pick up the charge. Yeah. So I have those. And it turns out that the FCC or somebody has decided that people who have toll-free numbers and use them for marketing purposes by sending text messages from them fall under a regulated category. Well, I don't use them that way. I use them for the convenience of my customers. And not only does the FCC decide that there's a regulated category involving toll-free numbers used for text, they also decide that people have to have an option to opt in and opt out. And if you have not signed the thing that says that we're in compliance, they can take away your toll-free number. So in order to do this, I've had to hire an expensive attorney to write a very expensive terms and conditions for me that I can post on my websites that explain how and why it is that we use toll-free numbers, which basically we've always used in the right way. We haven't used them to spam anybody. We haven't used them to advertise. We haven't used them for anything that the FCC now wants to regulate their use for. So it's costing me money to be able to sustain my own toll-free numbers, even though I don't use them for the purposes the FCC wants to regulate. And you can tell this frosts me.
And anybody that is in business, anybody, small business, big business, anybody that is in business has a story just like yours, at least one, if not 10 or 20 or 30.
There's no law.
All of this drives up the costs to your consumers because you have to pass it on to them. And all of it makes your business harder to do. And it is easier for major corporations who have large departments to comply with this stuff than it is for the beginning entrepreneur. So it actually stifles small business the most.
Oh, yeah. It's onerous.
James Madison, Federalist number 47. He says, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of, are you ready? Tyranny. So Congress, there's this idea in the we'll get into in some future episode, of a social contract that we made, and we created a constitution that creates or empowers the government that we have, where allegedly you and I don't remember being at this event, agreed that there were certain powers we would give up and we would allow to be held in an entity called the government, and that those powers then would be exercised for our benefit. We, in setting this up, said we want to make sure that we're not taken advantage of by any one of these parties, a judge, a president, a king, right? We wanted to keep that from happening. So we divided it up into 3 parts, and we said that there was going to be a legislative, an executive, and judiciary branch. Now, every time a regulation is promulgated, it comes from the executive branch. The executive branch's job is the enforcement. Judges don't have the power to enforce. Congress does not have the power to enforce. What Congress is supposed to do is legislate. So one entity makes the rules. Another entity implements or carries out those orders. A third entity looks at whether or not the main document, the law that's supposed to be governing all of them, was followed in the process. So these are all designed to be what are called checks and balances.
Right, sure.
When you take a power that belongs to one of those other branches and you put it in one that doesn't have that power, you are doing what's called an unconstitutional or anti-constitutional, I would argue, delegation of power. Only we were able to delegate power. That's all we were able to give them. So what ends up happening in this particular situation, I'm gilding this a bit, but I want everybody to understand, is that unelected bureaucrats end up making laws instead of Congress doing it for them. And Congress has been a willing participant in this game. They have frequently said,
hold, time out. You used the L word.
Which one?
When you said unelected bureaucrats make laws.
Yes.
Because the unelected bureaucrat can decide to do things in a certain way, and that is enforceable under the overarching law.
Correct. And those provisions never crossed the desk of the Congress. Now, Nancy Pelosi has a very, very famous statement. When discussing Obamacare during the debate, she said, we're going to pass the bill. We have to pass the bill in order to find out what's in it.
To find out what's in it. Yes.
Okay. Almost everybody thinks that when she said that, and I've been asked this question 100 times over the years on various shows and different things, that when she said it, what she was talking about was the fact that they don't read their bills. She was not. What she was talking about was the fact that there were going to be something in the neighborhood of 126 different panels, commissions, boards, and agencies created to help execute and implement the law. And since they had not yet been established, since they had not yet hired their personnel, and since that personnel had not yet actually written the rules for them to review, we had to pass it so that those events could occur, and then we would be able to know what they were.
Yeah, I'll start a business that way any day, man. With federal funding, I can run that business right until, forever.
Right. And so what they did is they delegated out a ton of their legislative capacity out to people that didn't even exist yet. Like these entities that were going to be doing the work, the people in those positions, these jobs, that would be a more accurate way to say it, didn't even exist yet. And so, yes, we had to pass it in order to find out what was in it.
And those jobs that didn't exist were in charge of making the regulations for which you, me, and everybody else in America is criminally liable if they don't follow.
Yes. So, you can take the IRS, the FTC, OSHA, or even your situation with your 800 number, right? The agency promulgates a regulation that citizens must obey. So that by definition is legislation. If they were making rules that governed how they were going to run their own agency, not a problem. Every entity makes its own rules as to how they're going to get things done. We're going to answer the phone on the third ring. We're going to get a report out by Friday. Those things, they can do that all day long. Okay. But when they make a rule that Congress didn't review or pass, that's legislation. They're outside of their boundaries. 2, they can bring charges against citizens to enforce these rules, which, by the way, was in their purview. So if the law exists, they are the enforcement arm, but they're acting there in their executive capacity. But please understand, they passed it and then they enforced it. And we were trying specifically to separate those two things. We do this at the county level too. You've got the sheriff and then you've got the commissioners. They do not, the sheriff doesn't write his laws and then go out and kick people around and make it do it. And you can understand the self-dealing that would go along and why this would be possible.
Yeah,
and
Wild
of course,
West,
in the bureaucracy, we've got the revolving door, right? Where people work for the bureaucracy and then go out to a cushy job in the private sector. They come in at a higher level in the bureaucracy and they go out to an even higher level in the private sector. Okay. 3, they adjudicate their own enforcement. So I want you to notice that they first acted like Congress, then they acted like the executive branch, and then they set up their own courts. Several of them have their own courts.
Yeah.
Keeping
IRS.
IRS is the biggest offender here. But what they're trying to do is make sure you can't actually get access to the courts. And they have an unlimited amount of money and capacity to fight you. You do not. And they want to wear you down. So even if you're right and you can win and you can keep winning all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, every single level is a piece of expensive friction. And sooner or later, you're just going to give in because it isn't worth the fight.
It isn't worth it.
And this is what they do right now. And we're saying that those options 1 and 3 are completely outside of their purview. They are unlawful delegations of power. Only Congress can legislate.
So focus on number 2. Let's take Obamacare because why not? What's it called? The Affordable Care Act. I'll be politically correct here. The Affordable Care Act was passed so that we could figure out how to implement it. So the proper way to have done that would have been, okay, let's figure out how to implement this. Before it's implemented, all of the agencies responsible come back with a Write the Laws Act bill and say, Congress, here is what we need in order to be able to do this Affordable Care Act that you've passed. Put this into a law, read it in front of everyone so everybody understands you know, and then we'll implement it. Once there's a law, we'll implement it.
You've explained it perfectly. I love how colloquially, how basic you made that. Okay. Yes. Here's the things we need you to do. Come back now and pass that. That's exactly what should happen here. So Congress has a chance to look at that and then debate, and hopefully there's a read the bill provision so that they are taking their time to do it and everybody gets to put their comment in, their 2 cents in, and maybe even stop a bad regulation or some portion of a bad regulation from becoming law. We also said in the Write the Laws Act that we created a review process for past legislation. I would like to add to this. I wish we had like a Sunrise Act that we could put with this, or Sunset, I should say Sunset, where every single thing that is law has some period where it all comes back to be reviewed again after we have a provision like Write the Laws in place, but we've got to get Write the Laws in place first. There should be some review immediately of all the stuff that was done over some period of time, year, 2, I don't know what it needs to be for, where everything gets brought back to Congress and Congress has to vote on it. It will be a really busy season, a busy time, but we've got stuff that's been on the books for a long time that no longer serves or fits us. We've got stuff that's been on the books that's been a constitution. Right. And all of that stuff should come up.
Lawyers, everybody could come up and we could fund a whole review.
And the process here would say, if they don't have time to get to it, it's gone. Like, they have to do this if they want to keep that stuff going too. So there'd be tremendous pressure to get this right. And we would actually downsize DC just with this provision all by itself.
There are certain parts of the bureaucracy, let's say, that work okay. And there are some smart people in there who are frustrated by the way that everything doesn't work, right? And a lot of those people have retired in place. But there's smart people down there that we could use to help make this work better. And I personal experience now with Affordable Care Act in California, some of those people are really on it. And they've told me, they're frustrated.
In fact, I almost wish they weren't quite as diligent. I have a friend who moved to South America and spent about 2 years down there. And he's like, the great thing about their government, even though it's technically more tyrannical, is that the people that are in the bureaucracy are fundamentally lazy. Americans are not. Our bureaucrats are not fundamentally lazy. They actually do, with great diligence and belief and faith and confidence, try to get their agendas accomplished. But their agendas are exactly that. They're interferences with human happiness. They violate the principle of human respect, which says that every time that you use force, whether it's violence or theft, to get your way, you're going to diminish the happiness, harmony, and prosperity of human beings. It's just automatic that that's what's going to happen. And so we want to see them stop engaging in this practice as much as possible. And we are Downsize DC after all. Now, having said all this, you want to know about the enforcement provision, right?
Yes.
How did these things actually become laws? Okay. If Congress, every one of these bills has the following provision in it. If Congress passes the law without following the provision of the Read the Bills Act, if that's the law, or the one subject to the Time Act, if that's the law, or the Write the Laws Act, if that's the law, every time that they pass one of these bills where they fail to follow the existing law provision, and you, Bill, find yourself in the dock. So let's say you don't do the 800 number thing they wanted you to do. You say, heck with that. And you find out that they didn't follow the one subject at a time act. Then you would be able to show that evidence to the judge and say, Your Honor, they didn't follow the provisions in this law. And the judge would kick the case to the curb with impunity. Now, when I say with impunity, that means it can never be brought up against you again. Okay? So if they want to waste their time passing laws where they're not going to follow the provisions that we've spelled out here, they can do it all day. We don't care. Like, don't bother. Skip the reading provision. Go ahead and waive it. But it doesn't actually apply. It's now a recommendation. It's actually not a regulation or actual legislation that actually is binding to us in any way. It's not enforceable. Try to enforce it, but we can go to that third branch and say, they didn't follow the rule and this is the law. Out it goes.
Any chance that the third branch, which has become more and more partisan, would say, no, Bill, you're crazy. This is obviously their intent. So therefore, you're frivolous. Comply or be, coerced.
Two things. First, of course, And I would say that we have had the best track record of success of the three branches from the judiciary, which has subsequently made itself also the weakest. Ironically, they were supposed to be kind of co-equal. They are the weakest. And they have done the best job of telling Congress and the president, no, they've not done a good job, but they've done the best job. They are a buffer and security. And utopia never happens to be one of the options.
True.
But the second fact is that there are abilities to appeal decisions that are made. And sooner or later, your odds of finding the right judge, even if the first judge, for example, gets it wrong, increase. And the court of late that has done the best job of protecting liberties has been the Supreme Court. They've made some edicts. They've come down and said, these things are not, and I know that there's some exceptions, but on balance, for example, they've tremendously strengthened the Fourth Amendment in the last few years. Basically the last half of the previous decade, they started doing so. And so, you know, that there's things that can be done here. And I'm not saying the work ends with all of this. And I'm not saying we arrive at utopia. Everything is about the trade-offs and how they lay. And this would dramatically change the incentive field. Now, I want to say something about the One Subject to Time Act that is very, very urgent and important. And that is that in addition to the fact that Rand Paul has introduced these bills in the House and Senate, in the Senate, all three times, the House has consistently introduced the One Subject to Time Act. They understand this backbencher appeal very well. And the provisions of Read the Bills and One Subject were in this recent Speaker McCarthy debate. So, and it was this bill that inspired it. In fact, two of the key players in that saga were Chip Roy and Lauren Boebert, who were both co-sponsors in the previous session of the One Subject at a Time Act. The One Subject at a Time Act finished the last session of Congress with 12 sponsors total. And 12. 12 co-sponsors, excuse me, it's 13 sponsors. They finished with 13 sponsors. And all but one of them has returned to the current Congress. So we have hope and belief, and we'll be in talks with the office that sponsored it, that it will be reintroduced in the House as well. Russ Fulcher from Idaho is the sponsor there. We reached our record two Congresses ago. So we've had two rows. The previous two Congresses were Russ Fulcher introducing. We're looking for him to do it a third time. The term before that was Mia Love, who's no longer in Congress. And she got us all the way up to 27 co-sponsors at the time. Now, most of the people that sponsored at the time are not there anymore. But that bill has actually achieved a certain level of success. We believe it's the first one that needs action. And the best way to do that action is to go to downsizedc.org, which is an organization I presently run and that I co-founded with Perry Willis, who co-wrote these bills with me and the help of the William J. Olson law firm. The bills, we have a plan there involving getting 300 people in every single district in the country who are willing to go in waves of 3, 5, or 6 to visit their legislative offices, demanding that these bills be sponsored. When we reach a point where we're at a majority, I'm hopeful before it'll come up for a vote. But once it does get to a majority, we can have we can petition. The members of the legislature can petition. It's called a discharge petition, so that when we get to 218 representatives, they can or more sponsoring the bill, they can, if the leadership still doesn't want to cooperate, they can use something called a discharge petition bill, which automatically brings the bill for a floor vote. But I think we would get there long before that point. And the One Subject at a Time Act is the gateway to read the bills and write the laws, in my opinion, based on the history that we've had on this. What we need is more, at Downsize DC, is more resources to get this done.
First of all, I've got to say congratulations. It's been 13 years now on this, 12, 13 years that you guys have been working on this. Probably longer than that. To get it to this place, some amazing support in the Senate from Rand Paul. And I hear what you're saying clearly, because the House, it sounds like to me, based on leveraging the Speaker McCarthy period of time, experience, whatever, knowledge, is in a place right now where there could be a tipping point. And
Yes.
taking advantage of that tipping point. And I encourage everybody who's listening to go to Downsize DC, find out how the 300 works, become part of the effort to do this, because it'll hit us in our pocketbooks until we do something about it, folks. And it's up to us. It really is. If I can put
I
a point on it.
I don't want to like anybody to miss this. We did a whole episode about Speaker McCarthy a few episodes ago, and that Speaker McCarthy battle. I mean, the terms of it and the ones that were being shouted the most by the likes of Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz were the very things we've talked about today. This was top of the list stuff that they wanted to put emphasis on. We did this. The people who've been involved with Downsize DC, all the people in the Downsize DC Army, God bless you. We were the ones that made this happen. Our time, our perseverance is what made this happen.
I want to introduce, or perhaps restate, a term here that's very interesting to me in this conversation about how to get these amazing bills into law. Transpartisan. I see this impacts both parties equally well. I don't see that there's a downside for any political party in this. Is that a correct assessment of this?
It is a correct assessment. So before this was even introduced for the very first time, we had a couple more years in the front end of getting this into what became the Tea Party movement, right? We were before the Tea Party movement. And when the Tea Party movement came on, Read the Bills became one of their main themes very quickly. And Rand Paul was elected amidst that Tea Party wave. We were arguing, we were going out and talking to people right and left. I would go to Tea Party groups, and obviously they were very enthusiastic. But when I would talk to anybody, regardless of where they're at in the political spectrum, as long as they did not work inside the geographic bounds called the Beltway in Washington, D.C., I was finding that like 90% of the people that I talked to, 95% of the people supported the Read the Bills Act enthusiastically. The only time I would ever get a question about what trouble this might cause would tend to come when I was inside the Beltway, not out. The same thing could largely be said for the Once Every Time Act. I would rate the number a little bit lower. Maybe it's 80, 85% there. And the same thing with Write the Laws Act. That's probably a little bit more conservative, but it would still get majority support. And that was true for a very, very long time. Now, I'm not out doing as many interviews about this as I used to be able to do because I have a variety of contracts and responsibilities that I'm presently involved in. But when I was doing this in my heyday, it would make common sense. And I would go on to talk shows, which I think is even more dramatic, where they're talking about this stuff every day. And I would go on to a show that thought Nancy Pelosi was great. And I would go on to a show that thought that who would be the Republican du jour, whatever, the Tea Party was great. And it wouldn't matter where I went. Across the board, I never, ever have done a radio or talk show or podcast appearance where the host of that program did not think this was anything short of a great idea. Every single time. It's stellar. So this reaches everyone. This is a nonpartisan idea. The only people that care about it are the people with power. The division here, the partisan division here, is between those who have the power and those of us who are outside that power. And there's a lot more of us than there are of them.
Well, then it's time. This is the people's initiative. And it directly affects us. This is a way that Congress does not serve us, regardless of which lever we pull in the voting booth. It just doesn't serve us. And we can hold it accountable by getting it to pass these laws. Do we have any other way to make a citizens initiative work on a federal level?
No, we have to get this done through Congress. Long term, maybe you have to go to constitutional amendments, which would be part of the answer to your question earlier. Like maybe this needs to be an amendment. I don't know. But for now, the next stage of this, we've already got some of this stuff in the rules. We need to get this stuff into law so that you're actually protected. And Congress is more likely to abide by it, not waive it.
Because I've been in this, Jim, with you now for a while on these things. But let me just reassure you, if you out there are listening to this, after 49 minutes, you're still listening to this, and you want to do the homework to figure out how this could affect you, I have never seen a set of simple laws that come so close to home as the Read the Bills Acts and the One Step at a Time Act and the Write the Laws Act. These are very, very personal. As a business owner, yes, but as a citizen, even more so. Because citizens, we are in deep hock right now in America. And part of the reason that we're in so deep is because we haven't had Congress doing its job. And if nothing else, these laws would make Congress do its job better than it has. Let's just say that, better than it has. and in a way that is transpartisan, bipartisan, even nonpartisan. So, Jim, give us a grace point to sort of bring this all home.
My work at Downsize DC precedes a lot of the spiritual thinking that I've been doing that tends to be the hallmark of this show. But it's still consistent. I believe that the problem, Bill, is how government spends its money. Most people will acknowledge that there is a tax and spend party in Washington, D.C., and then there is also a borrow and spend party. And at times they hand each other their yellow dog-eared scripts and play the other side. When they compromise, they agree that they will spend more in every instance because they are both focused on the revenue method and not the spending. What has been missing all along has been somebody address the spending. Now, I want to throw out a hypothetical example to you. This inspired the creation of Downsize DC itself. If I were to take all of the dollars that the federal government collects in taxes in a given year and pile them high like autumn leaves, and then set them on fire, let's leave out the ecological or environmental damage that such an act might do. I will argue that you will be better off, despite the fact that they've taken your money. The real problem is how they spend it. And if they spend it, they had to get it from somewhere, even if it's deficit spending. The spending is where they authorize people to come in and implement the various acts and deeds that they impose upon us. The spending is the nub of the problem. In fact, if you ended the spending, the well-meaning, smart people who work in the various bureaucracies, who work in the various halls of government, would go home and find another way to go make a living. And that way would almost naturally, in almost every case, be more honest, would serve their fellow man. So I am suggesting that the spending is the problem and that Downsize DC is a moral imperative. It's the only way to get, in some gradual sense, in some evolutionary sense, to a state where we actually practice consistently a principle of human respect. I believe that if we want to encourage the happiness of others, if we want to promote a society that reduces the conflict machine and expands grace, if we want to live in a voluntary society where we learn to look out for one another and we voluntarily act in acts of compassion that bring community together in solving problems, we have to find ways to do this. You already eloquently said, and I want to echo, that these are high leverage, efficient ways to get the job done that don't pick a team in doing it. And so for that reason, I call on everybody who's within the sound of my voice right now to do two things. Go to Downsize DC and sign up to be one of the 300. And number two, share this podcast and what you've learned here with your friends so that we can move ever closer to the Gracearchy that we seek.